My sister got pregnant by my fiancé and is now going to marry him. She has the audacity to ask for my wedding dress, so I decided to disgrace them both and give them hell. I'm a 29-year-old female and was engaged until very recently. The wedding was supposed to be this past February. My ex-fiancé, I'll call him Ryan, and I were together for just over 4 years. We met through mutual friends, and from the beginning, the relationship felt steady in a way I had never experienced before. We had little to no fight or arguments and always understood each other. We moved in together after about a year, built a routine, talked about the future in a way that felt calm and natural. Everyone around us constantly commented on how solid we were. When he proposed last year, I didn't hesitate for even a second. We planned a winter wedding because I love that whole soft, candlelit, intimate atmosphere. I spent months planning it carefully, because I had dreamed of marrying him for so long. It was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of my life with someone I trusted completely. The wedding dress was a huge part of the wedding preparation. I didn't buy a designer gown or anything flashy, but I did save for months to have a custom lace dress made by a local designer. I was involved in every single detail, from the shape of the sleeves to the pattern in the lace, because I wanted it to feel like me. When I tried it on for the first time, I cried so hard that the seamstress had to hand me tissues, and my mom was crying right along with me. It felt like a physical representation of everything I had worked toward and believed in. Every single fabric held special meaning because I had handpicked them with my fiancé. Now, my younger sister. I'll call her Sophie. She's 22 and very much the baby of the family. She has always been protected, forgiven, and excused in ways I never was. If Sophie messes up, it's because she's young and still learning. If I mess up, it's because I should have known better. I wasn't super close with Sophie, but we had what I thought was a normal sibling relationship. I trusted her, and never, even for a second, thought I needed to worry about her around my partner. About 3 weeks before the wedding, Ryan went on his bachelor party weekend. It wasn't anything wild. He booked an Airbnb in town to spend the weekend with his friends. The plan was drinking and some bar hopping. I trusted Ryan fully, so I wasn't worried about their itinerary, especially since they were going to be in town. Maybe I should have been worried. Around the same time, Sophie was in town visiting, and apparently she went out one night with Ryan and his friends. Why she would go out of her way to hang out with my fiancé on his bachelor weekend is beyond me, but the reasoning was she didn't want to be alone, and they were already out anyway. Now, on that same weekend, I was also having my bachelorette out of town. Sophie said she couldn't make it because of school, and I understood. At the time, that information didn't register as anything concerning. Then, one morning, Sophie called me crying so hard that I could barely understand what she was saying. I assumed something awful had happened, like an accident or a medical emergency, because she kept apologizing over and over again and saying she didn't know how to tell me. Eventually, through sobs, she told me she was pregnant. I was shocked, but my first instinct was concern. That changed when she hesitated for a moment, and then quietly told me that Ryan was the father. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought she had misspoken. My brain refused to process it. When I realized she was serious, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. She told me it had only happened once, that it occurred during the bachelor party weekend, that they were drunk, and that it was a mistake she never planned. She also admitted that she hadn't told me earlier because she was scared, and that the reason she was telling me now was because Ryan had started ignoring her messages, and she was afraid he would deny everything once the baby arrived. The conversation ended abruptly because I couldn't physically stay on the phone without breaking down, and after that, I blocked her number. Suddenly, it occurred to me. How can she know she is pregnant after just 2 weeks after their supposed one-time fling? They had to have been sleeping with each other well before that, for her to know for certainty that she is pregnant. The wedding was in 4 days, and I felt sick. So, I texted Ryan saying I knew everything. I called off the wedding and blocked him everywhere because the idea of hearing his voice or reading an explanation made me feel sick. That same day, I started canceling the wedding plans. I had to call vendors, venues, and coordinators and explain that the wedding was no longer happening due to personal reasons, while trying not to cry on the phone. I lost thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits, packed Ryan's belongings into boxes, and arranged for one of his friends to pick them up because I couldn't bear to see him. Ryan tried reaching out, but I told him to stay as far away from me as possible, because I didn't know how I would react if I saw him. So far, he has no way of contacting me, and I'd like to keep it that way. For weeks afterward, I barely functioned. I lived in old pajamas, barely ate, and replayed every moment of the last 4 years in my head, trying to understand how everything I trusted could collapse so completely. I cut off contact with Sophie entirely and avoided family gatherings because I needed space just to survive. A few months later, I learned through my mom that Sophie was keeping the baby. I didn't comment on it because it wasn't my decision to make. Then I found out she had reconnected with Ryan. Shortly after that, I was told they were trying to make it work for the baby, which was information I processed with a kind of numb disbelief that eventually turned into bitter laughter. I stayed no contact until last week, when Sophie messaged me asking if we could talk. Against my better judgment, I responded and asked what she wanted. She asked if she could have my wedding dress. At first, I thought I had misunderstood her message, but she went on to explain that they were considering getting married for stability, that money was tight, and that my dress was just sitting in my closet anyway. She finished by saying it would be like keeping it in the family, as if that somehow made the request reasonable. I felt physically ill reading that message. I told her there was absolutely no chance of that happening and that she had crossed a line just by asking. She responded by accusing me of being dramatic and telling me I needed to move on, adding that I was letting a man come between sisters. At that point, all the anger I'd been holding in finally came out, and I told her exactly what she had done to me and how unreal it was that she thought she could wear the dress I was supposed to marry her child's father in. I ended that conversation by telling her not to contact me again. After that, my mom called me in tears, saying Sophie was young, that she had made a mistake, that family should come first, and that the baby deserved a beautiful wedding. I told her very bluntly that I did not care where or how they got married, and that my dress was not part of their story. Now, my mom and sister think I'm bitter and vindictive, and I'm being treated like I'm the one causing division. So, am I the a-hole? Update. I am so overwhelmed by all your support, guys. Thank you. After I read through the comments of my previous posts, something shifted for me. For months, I had been operating purely on emotion, trying to survive day by day while everyone else around me minimized what had happened. But seeing hundreds of strangers point out that what my sister and ex-fiancé did wasn't just morally wrong, but financially damaging snapped me out of that fog. For the first time, I stopped thinking only in terms of betrayal and started thinking in terms of consequences. I had lost a significant amount of money when the wedding was canceled. Between the venue, vendors, deposits, and custom dress fittings, the total wasn't small, and every single dollar of it was spent in reliance on the assumption that my fiancé wasn't secretly sleeping with my sister. Multiple commenters mentioned that while suing family is messy, there are situations where people at least consult a lawyer to understand their options, so I booked a consultation more out of curiosity than intent. The lawyer was very clear with me and did confirm that I had incurred real financial losses based on deliberate deception. He explained that even if I never filed anything, a formal demand letter outlining damages and intent could be enough to force accountability, especially if people were currently pretending the fallout was nobody's fault. That conversation gave me something I hadn't felt in months: leverage. I didn't immediately tell Sophie or my mom. Instead, I gathered my receipts, contracts, and cancellation confirmations. Seeing the numbers laid out in black and white was sobering even for me. When my mom called me again a few days later, trying to guilt me into being the bigger person, I finally snapped in a way I hadn't before. I told her firmly that if Sophie and Ryan continued to contact me or pressure me about the dress, forgiveness, or reconciliation, I would move forward with recovering my financial losses through legal channels. I explained that the lack of accountability from either party was outstanding, and that the money I lost wasn't imaginary just because my sister was pregnant. My mom went quiet. She tried to backtrack, saying I was being extreme and dramatic, but for the first time, I didn't soften my tone to make her comfortable. I told her that what was extreme was expecting me to absorb thousands of dollars in losses while everyone else pretended it was just bad luck. I also told her that if my sister wanted peace, she needed to stop acting entitled to pieces of a life she helped destroy. Word got back to Sophie quickly. She called me in a panic, suddenly very concerned about whether I was serious, and asking if I would really sue her. I told her the truth, which was that I hadn't filed anything yet, but that I was done pretending this hadn't cost me anything. I also made it clear that I wasn't threatening her to be cruel. I was drawing a boundary and making it clear that there were real-world consequences for what she had done. That conversation was the first time she stopped arguing. Instead, she cried and said she hadn't realized how much money I lost, which honestly just confirmed how little she had thought about anyone but herself. After the conversations with my mom and Sophie, and after making it clear that I was no longer going to tolerate being guilted or pressured, something else started bothering me more than the anger ever did. A large portion of my extended family, and even some of my friends, had absolutely no idea why my wedding had been canceled in the first place. Up until that point, the story being told was vague and sanitized. For some reason, I felt shame for being cheated on with my own sister. People knew the wedding was off, but they had been given versions that sounded like things didn't work out, or there were personal issues, which conveniently left out the part where my sister slept with my fiancé and got pregnant. That vagueness allowed my mom and Sophie to frame me as bitter, unforgiving, and dramatic, without anyone knowing what I was actually reacting to. At some point, it became clear to me that I was the only one paying the price for staying quiet. I had been protecting everyone else's comfort while absorbing all the fallout myself, and the longer I stayed silent, the easier it became for my mom and sister to paint me as the problem. That realization flipped a switch. I stopped asking myself whether telling the truth would cause drama, and started asking why I was expected to carry a secret that wasn't mine to keep. So I told my mom I was done being quiet and was going to tell our extended family and friends exactly why the wedding was canceled. She had previously convinced me to keep it hush because the fallout would be too much for our family. This time, she tried to argue that it would destroy the family, and that some things were better kept private. But I told her that the family was already affected whether people knew the truth or not, and the only difference was who was being blamed for it. Also, family already knew Ryan was my fiancé, so what did they think people would say if they heard he was getting married to my sister a few months after my wedding with him was canceled? A few days later, after sitting with it, I followed through and reached out privately to the relatives who had been asking questions or making comments. I explained, plain and simple, that my wedding had been canceled because my fiancé had cheated on me with my sister, and she became pregnant as a result. I simply told the truth and answered questions when they asked. Update. I want to address this first, because a lot of people messaged me asking whether my family actually supported my sister after everything came out. The answer is no, not in the way my mom and Sophie seemed to expect. Once people understood what had actually happened, the tone shifted dramatically. Relatives who had previously been distant or neutral started reaching out to me privately to express shock and sympathy. A few admitted that they had assumed the wedding was called off because of mutual issues or cold feet, and they apologized for quietly judging me without knowing the truth. The support mattered more than I expected. As for my mom, she was furious that I told people. She accused me of humiliating Sophie and airing private business, even though that private business had already upended my life. Sophie, on the other hand, went very quiet. The confidence she had before, when she thought I would stay silent forever, disappeared once she realized people were no longer viewing her actions through a softened lens. There were uncomfortable conversations. Some relatives refused to engage with Ryan at all. Others made it very clear that while they felt concern for the baby, they didn't condone how that baby came into the world. The easy sympathy Sophie had been counting on simply wasn't there. Following my lawyer's advice, I drafted a formal demand letter. That letter outlined the costs I had personally covered, the circumstances under which those costs were incurred, and my intent to recover a portion of those losses if necessary. It was very clear that I was no longer willing to absorb the consequences of other people's choices in silence. I had the letter sent to Ryan directly, with Sophie copied. Ryan, who had never tried reaching out, found a way and called me in a panic. He used a different number, something he hadn't bothered to do these past few months. He suddenly wanted to talk things through and find a reasonable solution. My mom found out about the letter and accused me of taking things too far, but I told her she was cruel for protecting the sister who cheated, lied, and destroyed my future while expecting me to clean up the financial mess quietly. Update. I honestly posted this thinking maybe a handful of people would respond, but reading thousands of comments from strangers who weren't emotionally invested in my family helped ground me in a way I didn't expect. The overwhelming consensus was that I wasn't wrong, and that gave me enough clarity to finally stop engaging with people who kept trying to guilt me. I want to clear something up first, because a lot of people kept asking what Ryan had actually contributed to the wedding. The truth is, not that much. I earned significantly more than Ryan throughout our relationship, and I had been covering far more of our shared expenses than anyone realized. That included the wedding. From the beginning, most of the deposits, planning costs, and vendor payments came from me, because I was financially stable and genuinely believed we were building a life together. Ryan talked a good game about contributing once things settled, and I trusted that he would follow through. That is why I incurred most of the cancellation losses. The demand letter worked in ways I hadn't anticipated. The entitlement vanished overnight, and Sophie stopped asking for anything from me entirely. Ryan's financial situation was also exposed. Sophie was under the impression that Ryan was far better off financially than he actually was. Somewhere along the line, he had led her believe that he was comfortable, established, and more or less set, which helped sell the fantasy that starting a family with him would automatically mean stability. That illusion didn't last very long once they started planning for the baby. Not long after, things between Sophie and Ryan started falling apart on their own. Ryan was apparently parading as a single guy after our canceled wedding while planning to wed Sophie. After news of their cheating and getting together got out, one woman he is apparently currently involved with reached out to Sophie on Instagram to confirm whether they are actually together or she was just his baby mama. A friend revealed to me that Ryan and Sophie had a massive fight, and Sophie ended up at my mother's house in tears. The wedding my mom had been so worried about turned out to be nothing more than an idea with no realistic foundation. Sophie tried to reach out to me again through our mother as she is still blocked. After listening to my mother's sob story and how sorry Sophie is, I just felt exhausted. I told her I hoped things worked out for Sophie and her child, but that I wasn't willing to rebuild a relationship. As a matter of fact, I was still going to pursue legal action if they kept bothering me. Spoiler, I never ended up filing a lawsuit. I never intended to actually. The letter did exactly what it was supposed to do. Force them to confront the fact that what they did had measurable consequences, and that I was no longer willing to absorb those consequences to keep the peace. As for the dress, I am thinking of donating it to a local organization that helps women who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a wedding dress. I believe this chapter of my life will be fully closed once that is done. Ryan is completely out of my life now. Sophie is facing the consequences of her choices, and for the first time since everything collapsed, I feel like I can finally move forward.